Is flying at night dangerous? What happens if the aircraft is hit by lightning? And what happens if we lose our radios? All these questions are going to be answered on today's Pilot Explains. Hi everyone, I'm Captain Mark. I'm a commercial Airbus captain based at Manchester, and you're watching Pilot Explains. So the first thing we're going to look at is what happens if one of our engines fail. Well, this is an incredibly rare event due to the massive improvements in engine technology and reliability. In the case of an engine loss after takeoff, the aircraft will climb fine on one engine, even at maximum weights. All takeoff performance calculations are based on losing an engine at the most critical point. Most airlines will have an engine out procedure. The aircraft will quite happily fly on one engine. It's an incredibly rare occurrence, and we train for it every 6 months in a simulator. Smoke and fumes event. The most important thing is that pilots get themselves on oxygen. Once this is done, the immediate emergency goes away. You will run a checklist to try and identify and isolate the source of the problem. Most of the time it will be from an air conditioning pack or an electrical source, which can normally be switched off. If the smoke and fumes becomes too heavy, there is a removal technique that will clear and purge the aircraft of these fumes. I have had one of these myself, and we continued and landed and all the passengers were fine. In the old days, you would navigate from a ground-based beacon to another beacon. Technology's improved over time, and distance measuring equipment was added to the beacons so you know how far away they are. Then aircrafts got the screens fitted and basic moving maps came along. Now GPS is used with much greater accuracy. We have things fitted called ADIRS that have internal laser ring gyros that tell the flight computers where they are with really good accuracy if you're out of the range of land-based beacons. We have instruments in the flight deck that we use to fly at night and in cloud when we can't see out. The primary flight display is the main instrument. The modern ones have speed, heading, altitude, rate of change of height on them. Air traffic can see us on radar and can give us headings for shortcuts towards the runway and get us to land earlier. Flying over the sea. Very similar to flying over the land at night. We navigate by GPS or ADIRS. You'll lose radio communications if you're far enough out, so use HF radio, where you bounce radio waves over the ionosphere to the station that you want to contact. Or if they're fitted, you can use satellite communications. There are procedures in place if you have a tech issue or weather avoidance if you're over the sea and a long way out. Normally you'll need to be an hour from a suitable airport in case of engine failure, but most long-range twin-engine aircraft will have a certification called ETOPS. This gives the aircraft the right to fly for longer periods over the sea in case an engine fails. Fuel emergency. The trick is never to get into that situation, and you do that by making sure you've got enough fuel in the first place. If you find yourself in a position where you're getting tight on fuel, maybe being at a lower level where you burn more fuel, or stronger unforecast headwinds or weather avoidance that wasn't forecast, then you have some options. Flying higher where possible will help, it'll burn less fuel. Using a lower cost index in the flight management computer will also use less fuel. But ultimately, if you are getting short on fuel, then you have the option of declaring what's called minimum fuel. This states that an aircraft's fuel supply has reached a state where upon reaching the destination, it can accept little or no delay. It's not an emergency situation, but merely indicates that an emergency situation is possible should any further undue delay occur. If you look like you're going to go into what's called the final reserve fuel, then a mayday must be declared. This again is a very rare occurrence, and air traffic control will help facilitate you getting on the ground as soon as possible if you start getting low on fuel. These can feel unpleasant for the passengers, but we have strict wind limits for the aircraft, and we won't make an approach if the wind is outside these limits. We have a thing called an approach ban point, which we're not allowed to cross if the limits are too low to land. We will load extra fuel for more goes at landing, if we need to go around, and for holding. We may circle and hold near the airport and wait for the wind to calm down a bit, and if on the final approach it gets too rough, we'll go around or go back up and climb back up where it's safe, and we'll wait for it to calm down a bit. We also have the option to divert somewhere where it's less windy or the wind's more in line with the runway. You may hear the term wind shear.
Wind shear.
This is a sudden change of direction and or strength of wind. Aircraft are fitted with two types of wind shear protection. One gives you a warning that wind shear's ahead so you can avoid it.
Go around, wind shear ahead.
And the other one tells you that the aircraft has sensed wind shear and you must go around to get away from it. So with the windy landings, they look impressive on the live streams that you've seen. They may feel a bit uncomfortable for the passengers, but it's quite safe. We practice strong wind landings, strong crosswind landings in the simulator regularly, and we get plenty of practice at Manchester. But like I said earlier, we will not make approach if the wind is too strong, so it really is quite safe. The next one we talk about is mid-air collision. We have a thing fitted called TCAS, the Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System, and it's an airborne system designed to increase cockpit awareness of nearby aircraft and serve as a last defence against a mid-air collision. You should never get that close anyway. Air traffic control have predictive systems on their systems and they will keep you apart. But should it happen, the TCAS will save the day. The system monitors airspace around an aircraft for other transponder equipped aircraft that we talked about earlier, any that may present a collision threat. TCAS operates independently of any ground-based equipment to provide pilots with guidance on how to avoid a potential collision.
Traffic. Yes, I have.
When a traffic advisory is issued, pilots are instructed to initiate a visual search for the traffic causing the TA. So you look out on the window, you look at the screen and you look for where the aircraft is in relation to you. Then you can see the aircraft and you can work out for yourself what's actually happening. Air traffic control will give you separation. There are timed spaces between departures so that you have the required cleared space from other aircraft. When you're up in the cruise, if you're in airspace over Europe, it's called RVSM, Reduced Vertical Separation Minimum. So you will be 1,000 feet apart from any other aircraft, and normally if you're flying along an airway, a motorway in the sky, you will be 20 miles from the aircraft in front and 20 miles from the aircraft behind you. As you come into land, air traffic will give you headings to steer you away from other aircraft. The next one is loss of radio communications. What happens if our radios fail? On the Airbus we have 3 radios. It's very, very unlikely for all 3 to fail. It's very, very unlikely for 1 to fail. But should it happen, we have set procedures laid down by ICAO, and also the UK has its own procedures. If all attempts to establish contact fail, transmit a message twice on the designated channel, preceded by the phrase transmitting blind. If you are transmitting but not receiving, everyone else around you will hear and know where the problem is. Again, we go back to the transponder. We set the code to 7600. Always remember, 76 radio fix. The transponder is in the flight deck. It's a little bit of kit that's interrogated by air traffic control. If you can't communicate because the radios aren't working, you can communicate by using the transponder. As soon as you put 7600 in that transponder, it will flash up on the screen and all the air traffic controllers around will know that you've lost comms. What happens if we're hit by lightning? Again, it's a normal non-event and most aircraft are struck by lightning around once a year. The main trick is to avoid being that close to a thunderstorm in the first place. We have complex weather radars that are in the nose of the aircraft which will show us convective clouds and thunderstorms. The latest ones will show us where the lightning strikes are as well, so we can avoid them. On the wingtips and on the tail you have these little sticks sticking out called static wick discharges, and these help dissipate a build-up of static electricity from the airframe into the atmosphere. Mr. Boeing and Mrs. Airbus spend a lot of money each year shielding all the technology on board that we use to fly the aircraft from interferences and external sources. So to summarise, all aircraft have massive amounts of redundancy, also known as backups. We have multiple hydraulic systems powered by multiple pumps. We have a self-healing hydraulic system with multiple sources of generation. We have multiple fuel tanks with multiple fuel pumps in those. If a system does fail, it will have a backup. And for a really important system like the hydraulics, for example, your backup will have a backup as well. So that's the reason why it's called the safest form of transport.